we're really, really excited today to welcome back Peter McDowell, who showed a rough cut of his film Jimmy in Saigon here last year, and now the film is finished and getting out into the world, and we're going to bring his two producing partners, Lucia Palmarini and Peter Schulman, here as well, and do a case study. We did a case study a few months ago that we didn't record, but was on the film Hidden Letters. It was about to premiere at Tribeca, and we thought it'd be really interesting to do a case study of a film that we knew was really good, but hadn't gone out into the world yet, and so its fate commercially was unknown. I mean, normally case studies are done of very successful documentaries, and everybody looks back and they talk about how from humble beginnings they made such a success of it. We find it really interesting to do case studies of films that are still kind of in progress in a way. So anyway, with that in mind, what's particularly interesting about Jimmy in Saigon, aside from it being a terrific film, and hopefully it will be playing at a theater near you or a festival near you, or some way that you can see the film, and we'll ask Peter about that. But it's really inspiring because it's a film that, a journey that Peter began back in 2010. So for those of you who it's taking a particularly long time to get your films made, hope you'll take heart from Peter's experience. So let's kick it off, Peter, by if you could just, for those who weren't at the work in progress session, if you could just briefly describe Jimmy in Saigon and what was the impetus for making it?
Sure. Well, thank you. It's such an honor to be here, and it's such an honor to be back. And do you want me to do screen share now, or you want me to wait to do that later?
You can do screen share if it's going to help, with this. Well, sure.
Yeah, just a little bit. And we'll see how much. How much time do we have in general? Or
We have till 1:30. If we
okay.
don't go over, if we go over, you have more.
All right. All right. Well, basically, this is an idea that I had for a long time. I had made some short films in the 90s that were in film festivals, Super 8 films. And I had the idea of making a feature documentary about my brother who died in Vietnam in 1972 when I was 5 years old and he was 24. But I kind of put it on the back burner because I always had a full-time job and I didn't have enough time or energy on the evenings and weekends. Moreover, I knew I didn't want to make it as a video because I didn't like the way video looked in the 90s, and I liked film. I liked the way film looked, but everyone told me that 16 35 millimeter film, all that was really expensive, and I got scared. So I just didn't, and I didn't go to film school, so I didn't really know much about film other than Super 8, which I was pretty familiar with, and I did take some film classes in grad school. Fast forward to 2010, I started realizing that HD video was really great looking, and I fortunately got laid off from a job in New York City that I wasn't enjoying, and I started my own kind of consulting business, and I had a modular life where I had like different ways of thinking about time, and I thought, my God, I think maybe I can make this film. So I started talking to various filmmakers in Brooklyn where I was living, and I said, do you think this is a good idea or bad idea? And they all said this is a great idea. And I started doing research. So I'm gonna go through this really briefly, but I long ago, Dan Savage, some of you know who Dan Savage is. He's a writer, he writes Savage Love, and he was my first boyfriend. We dated in college, And he had always encouraged me to make this film. So then once it kind of got going on the film, I asked him if he could be involved, and he said, well, he always says I'm bad with money, but he said, I'll be, you want to put my name on there as executive producer. And so we did, and he's actually come on as a lot more than that. He's really helped us shape the film. And as you see below, we've now been to 4 festivals. Well, no, sorry, we've been to 8 festivals, but we have some great laurels here from BFI Flair in London, as well as Frameline, San Francisco, Bentonville, and then the Lovers Film Festival in Arkansas. And this is just a brief, I probably won't read it for you, but essentially the film is a personal documentary looking at my brother's life. And I think probably the last sentence is really important. It's a work examining grief, family secrets, war, drug use, sexuality, and healing. We had our world premiere in London at British Film Institute's Flair Festival. We've done 8 festivals so far. We got 17 more to come. We have won 2 Best Documentary awards. And I guess sort of the biggest story really is that we applied for grants for many, many years, but we just didn't get hardly any. And I'm hearing that this is a thing that happens sometimes with those of you who come to this meeting. So I ended up raising over $200,000 from more than 650 donors. And now I teach fundraising classes on how to do that. Today we have, myself, and I'm really, in a way, kind of a new filmmaker. I'd never made a feature documentary before this. I had only made these 2 Super 8 short films. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about, how and when I met Lucia and Peter. This is sort of a timeline of our general of how things work. So again, back in 2010, I'd gotten laid off from this job. I had like a more modular life, and I bought a used HD camera and sound equipment. I probably invested like $2,000. And I just thought, I'm going to travel the world trying to meet everybody who ever knew my brother. I recently got an inquiry from somebody who was in a similar situation where they were dealing with people that they thought, well, maybe they won't be around for that long and we don't really know what to do. And I said, hey, step 1, get a nice HD camera or hire a camera person and just start recording people, because that's kind of a good way of starting. You don't have to have like a full-fledged plan to start recording, to start doing recording. As long as you have good sound and good, a decent camera, it's never too early to start recording people for, a personal documentary. So between 2010, 2015, we had initial footage. We did some individual giving. I created a website. I would say things really got moving in 2000, but we did a lot of key shooting between those years, with basically nobody but me and, no real help. And then 2016, I was like, we have to make more money. So we did an Indiegogo, which is a kind of like Kickstarter, raised $20,000, did my first trip to Vietnam. We were able to create the first teasers. In 2017, I hired Lucia Palmarini, who's here on the call with us, on the Zoom with us, as a consultant to really do 2 things: to create a strategic plan, which we called a roadmap, and a budget. This was absolutely transformative to us in every way, because with these 2 things, we were able to really move forward. And Lucia said and did something that is so moving to me, which is that she said, I will meet with you for 1 hour a month for as long as it takes. And we have met with her for 1 hour a month ever since then. She does other work besides that 1 hour that she meets with us on the sides. But just that sort of consistency of having someone that truly believes in us has been amazing. And I think in transparency, just so people understand how the system works, Lucia is not a producer who has given, of her own individual funds to the film. That's not what she does. She's a person that has given to us in the sense of organization and planning and advocacy, and really just being consistent. So I had a big discovery in the film. We created a first look. We did some salons at people's houses. Still didn't have enough money. So then I had a big idea to create 5 fundraising events in 5 cities. We raised $30,000. How did I choose the 5 cities? They were the 5 cities I had lived in my adult life: New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, and in my hometown of Champaign-Urbana. With that $30,000, we were able to pay for most of our first editor's cost. Kelly Creedon from North Carolina, amazing editor. We slid in to the pandemic with an editor hired, and she spent almost a year editing. We did a virtual event during the pandemic where we raised about $20,000. 2021, I started what I called the $1,000 donor plan, which is where I was like, it's great to get $25 donations, but it doesn't move us forward that quickly. So I created a list of people that I thought could maybe give $1,000, and a lot of them were big, gulp moments for me. Were like, I don't know if they'll do it, but I also knew that all these people had money, and I found that a lot of them just signed on, did the $1,000. We were able to make money quicker. A lot of these people gave again and again and again. I did what I called Zoom pep rallies, which is just a free thing we do on Saturday afternoons occasionally, where I just have everybody show up and give them updates on the film. I did a printed, I don't have it with me, but a printed investor donor report that I mailed out to people. And around that same time, we'd had the rough cut, which we showed at D-Word for feedback. We hired our second editor, Liz Carr, equally wonderful. Both of our editors were wonderful. She got us to picture lock. We did all post-production. We did a lot of matching challenges, meaning a donor would, a donor would give $5,000. We would say that this donor would give $5,000, would match every gift up to $5,000 so that their gifts would be doubled. And that really, really works well with people. We completed world premiere, and the fundraising continues. We still have to pay for distribution costs. And I forgot to mention that Peter Schulman came on in about 2019. And Peter came on as a sort of an all-purposes assistant. Then he sort of moved up to that plus grant writer. Then he moved up to associate producer. Then he moved up to producer, assistant editor, post-production supervisor. I mean, he's been sort of our everything person. And his deal, in contrast to Lucia's, is that Peter is a paid employee of the project, but he also has some unpaid producer hours. So there is some equity that Peter and Lucia each will get from this if the film makes money. And we know how much money personal documentaries make. So, but we're hoping to have some sort of successful distribution, which we're working on right now. I think I also teach fundraising classes. I don't kind of want to bog this down too much with all of this stuff, but these are just some things that I think absolutely everybody must do.
Peter, if I can interrupt for a second, why don't we get back to this, because I want to do a deep dive in fundraising.
Yeah.
But I want to also bring Lucia and Peter into them a little bit. I'm curious, Lucia, about this strategic plan that you worked with Peter on. Can you tell us what was involved with this when you came on the project? What kind of mess was it, and what was involved in developing this strategic plan? What does that exactly look like for those of us who don't have a wonderful consultant to come in and tell us how to do things?
So first, hello everyone. I'm Lucia Palmarini. Thanks, Doug, for pronouncing my name right. It's a rarity indeed. I am a producer, a strategist, and an educator. I live in Mexico, in a small state called Michoacan. I work in Cincinnati, Ohio. Actually full-time. I am a strategic planner for a racial equity and maternal mortality organization. Anybody has a film about that, hit me up. And I am also an educator. I teach filmmaking classes and produce student projects, community projects, concerts, and more. So, but my heart and soul comes down to strategic planning. So I love that that's the first question that you asked. So when we started, so I'm going to address one of the questions that was in the chat. So how did Peter find me? Through mutual friends, like most of us find each other. He reached out to, was it Becky? It was Becky Sochetti, I think.
Probably, yeah. Who's now the director of the Hawaii International Film Festival.
Did we apply there?
Yeah.
Good. Thanks for the reminder. And said, you know, I'm looking for somebody to come on, and she sent something out to her people. You know, I think this is a good example of the way you can, I don't want to say use different relationships, but like activate different relationships. Becky was a person who was influential in the Chicago film community and had a lot of connections. She used to work for the Chicago Film Office. And Peter didn't come to her for money, he came to her for relationships, connections. And there are a lot of people in that category that helped connect Peter to other people that were able to take him to the next stage. So that's how we met. And when I came in, there was a lot of, it was definitely he had shot a lot. I'd say probably at that point, maybe like 60%. Is that about accurate?
Sure. Yeah.
And there were some ideas of what it could be, but it was the story structure did not exist yet. And he had raised a decent amount of money to like pay, you know, for little things. I mean, not nearly as much as he raised in the 5 years since, but was sort of a bit of a standstill. And I remember he was like, I want to finish this film in 1.5 years or something. And I was like, okay. You know, knowing that was probably unrealistic, but that's sort of where we started. In general, with strategic planning, it's like, where do you want to go? Where do you want to get to? And really iterate that vision. That's the first thing we did. Like, what does success look like for you? What does that mean? And making sure that we broke that down in terms of production, in terms of fundraising, in terms of distribution, and then also just operations. And so looking at a long-term vision, and then looking at, okay, what are the benchmarks? What are the sort of goals that we need to hit as we get there? Again, we didn't even, I think for our first 2 sessions, we didn't talk dates. We just talked, what are the goals? What is the end vision? Where do we want to get to? And then after goals, what are all the steps that need to happen in order to get there? And I always encourage my clients, no matter what field they're in, to make those steps as not granular, but as detailed as is helpful, because it's very overwhelming. I mean, I can't think of a more overwhelming project, other than, of course, solving infant mortality, than making a documentary film. There's just so many endless steps. And so give yourself some easy wins. You know, what's one thing I can do in the next month to make it towards this goal that I have? Once we laid out that vision, those goals, those steps, we then broke it apart and outlined it into a timeline, a working timeline. That was that was sort of that first initial step. And then we had what we call the roadmap. I'd say then, so that was really the beginning, that then we used that roadmap. I think we used it really intentionally for like maybe I'd say 3 years, 3 or 4 years almost, that we really used it to make sure that we were making progress. And every month we would go through and say, well, what has been accomplished that we had hoped to accomplish, and what did not. And then when it did not, we just moved it up. We moved it forward. And that's going to happen. Acknowledging that's going to happen, being okay with that happening. That's part of the process. Emergent strategy. You make the plan and then you work your plan. Doesn't make the plan and then you change your plan. You iterate it. You are you're just ready to make those changes as the project shifts. I'd say, but making sure that we had really specific deliverable or really specific action steps for every month. So, for example, if it was like, okay, next year we want to hire an editor by like January. So it's August. Okay, so by January, this is the working backwards method. By January, if we want to hire an editor, then we want to contract them by November, you know. And then, so that means we probably want to like select the editor by October, which means that we probably want to like do interviews by September, which means that we probably need to list it by August, which means then that we need to iterate it in our budget by July. So there you go. That's like a 6-month sort of onboarding. Are those dates going to change? Sure. But you know, if you haven't raised the money by October, you're not going to be able to hire the editor in January. I can't tell you how many, literally every month we do this with Jimmy and Saigon. We look at the budget and we say, what are we planning to spend in the next month? And what can we what can we spend in the next month? What do we need to push forward? That's going to happen, right?
It's so interesting to hear this, Lucia, because, you know, I do producing for others and, you know, I do a lot of consulting producing, and I always start with goals and what does success look like for you? And what's your vision for the film? Because, you know, in the end, you may not have anything else than ending up with the film that that you set out to make, and then working backwards. You know, and what are the steps needed to take to get there? I often give homework assignments. It sounds like what you're doing in a sense. But it, you know, as you were talking, I realized that's kind of a process you do in the editing when you're editing your story. In a sense, you know, it's so helpful when you know the ending. And, you know, if you have, you know, in terms of the character arc or arcs in the film, and then you work backwards with your editor and you're constantly, okay, if they end up here, where did they start at the beginning to give the widest, most dramatic arc, and where are those points along the way that they hit to show the evolution or the growth of the character. So kind of interesting. Peter Schulman, it's interesting. Had you ever produced before, or is this your first official producing credit?
Yes, no, absolutely my first time producing.
So you know, what's interesting here is, I mean, so many of us in our networking sessions that we do here, you know, we talk about what we want or what we need to move our projects forward, and almost everyone says, I need a producer. You know, how do I get a producer? So it's interesting to hear how Peter brought both of you on board. Neither of you were initially a producer in credit. So I'm curious, Peter Schulman, what have you learned about producing along the way from working with Lucia and working with Peter McDowell on this?
Yeah, that's God, it's such a big question. I mean, I think I would just say that it can look like anything. It can look like what Lucia does is this kind of overall structural vision of the film that I was able to kind of find my way within. And then I would say that in this larger structure, I'm kind of the connective tissue. And for me, that's looked like everything from sending lots of small emails to coordinate these salons we've been hosting at various cities, to meeting daily with our editor, our lead editor, and looking at key creative decisions. So I mean, I think the role can really be anything. For me, it's most about trying to realize Peter's vision. I would say that's kind of the main takeaway for me, right? How can I help create Peter's film, right? And I've been working on a film of my own, also a personal documentary for the past few years. So I brought that, the experience of wrestling with these big questions, very personal questions, but also trying to bring something out into the world that requires money and an audience. And it's been helpful to understand the struggles of being a director and bringing that to my job as a producer.
Peter M, do you find that giving producer credit is sort of like, in lieu of, is it something you give in lieu of payment in a way? Acknowledging, I've worked with filmmakers who have been stingy with credits, which I don't understand because it's currency. A credit is one of the few things we have of currency in this field. So was that part of the thinking in giving Peter and Lucia producer credit?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to realize, like, a lot of people come to, say in these meetings, or come to me and say, like, I want a producer who's going to fund my film. And I was like, well, there's different kinds of producers. And I think the number one thing, of course, you can't look into the future, but I think what became clear with Peter and Lucia, and I think that we discussed it, is like, are you in it for the long haul? And I think if someone's in it for the long haul and they're really good, which these people are both like at the top of their game in terms of how good they are with everything they do, then to me, it's a no-brainer. You're in it for the long haul, you believe in it, and you're really good. So I think that's a perfect person to be a producer. And, I'm a producer in the sense that I'm doing tons of administrative work, and I've raised most all of the money for it. So I think we each like bring separate things. I have a couple donors that I've called contributing producer. And then I have one donor that gave so much that I've elevated him to co-executive producer. And these are some levels that we actually set out a few years ago when we made our initial pitch deck, and we like found somebody else's example and we're like, I don't know, I guess we'll give levels. I did see a quick question about levels. Levels are just, to me, incredibly important. Donors think of levels like they must think of them like video games, because people are like, I want to get to the next level. I want to get to the next level. And I'm like, great, give more money and we'll get you to the next level. So that's also another kind of win-win situation.
Just want to point out to everybody that shortly, in about 10-15 minutes, we'll open this up to questions from you guys. So I know there's been a lot of questions in the chat, but if you use the raised hand function, then we'll kind of, line you up and one by one, let you come on camera to ask the questions. And that part, by the way, we'll turn the recording off for. So while we're still recording, Peter, Ben, let's get back to fundraising. You were about to dive into it with your screen share. Do you want to go back to that and take us through the steps? And remember, you're muted.
Yeah, now I'm not muted. Yeah, I'll do a little bit. I don't want to take up too much time, but some of this is, I've kind of condensed it a bit. So we've talked about a lot of this stuff. I think once we get to like the fourth bullet point, you know, I encourage filmmakers to really put themselves out there. People often say, is it too early for me to have a website? The answer is always, no, it's not too early. You know, you got to thank people, tiered giving programs, which we can talk a little bit more about. I mentioned matching challenges, the simple Zoom events. Many ways to give is something that I kind of learned along the way, meaning like people were like, can I give to you by Venmo? And I was like, sure. So, you know, or can I write you a check? Sure. Can I give you cash? Sure. Like, you know, we have to like figure out, obviously you have to like make sure everything's fine with your fiscal sponsors. Fiscal sponsors do not accept cash donations. So like you have to, if your donors want a tax deduction, they have to go through the fiscal sponsor. But you as a filmmaker can also accept money, unless your fiscal sponsor forbids it. You can accept your money in various ways. You know, I know a lot about fundraising. I've studied it, I've done it professionally, and I want to share a few quick things with you. This is something that guides me in everything I do, and it's based on a book I really like called The Cycle by Michael Kaiser. And it's really intended for arts organizations, but it works for documentary filmmaking as well. And that is that you have to kind of like keep going around this circle. And great art or great programming, great art is so important, because a lot of people wonder whether they should cut corners. Well, maybe I'll just make a cheaper version. No. You know, one of the things that we were really clear with Lucia is that we wanted to make a really good film, and we had really high ambitions. So that means that we did up the money that we spent on editing, on color, on sound. You know, we wanted to make sure that what we were creating was great art. And it doesn't just mean your final project. It means the 5-minute clip, the 10-minute clip, like just making sure that all of that is as excellent as possible, getting the word out there. And then you grow what's called your family, which is your donors and your supporters, and that adds to more revenue. And the more revenue then makes better art. So oftentimes, you know, in the studies that I've done, when you have a project that's not doing well, or an arts organization that's not doing well, you try to look at this cycle and say, which side of it isn't working so much. And another graphic that I like to tell people are the cycles of donor solicitation, of you know, taking care of donors. Prospecting, meaning that you are looking for donors, researching, finding about them, seeing who else they give to. Cultivation, inviting them to events, having a phone call, a Zoom, coffee, etc. Solicitation, asking them for money. This doesn't have to be in person. It could be via email. It could be via newsletter. Stewardship means continually thanking donors and inviting them to other things so that they can enjoy. And often a lot of those donors will give again. So I have donors that have given 6, 8, 10 times over the course of the 12 years that we made the film. Yeah, I can probably stop at this slide. I don't want to take too much time, but you know, you definitely want to keep track of everything in a great database. If you want to use a Google spreadsheet, that's fine. I pay for a donor database called Little Green Light, which is an online database where you can put all of your donor information. You know, when I give my fundraising classes, I explain why I think philanthropy works. It's mutually beneficial. People get really scared about asking for money. And I say, like, look, people with means, people who have capacity, that's the word we use in the fundraising industry, meaning, you know, I have so many friends who would have funded this film 1 million times over, but they have no capacity. They have no means or ability to give. So they give me love, they give me $25, they give me, you know, things that are great. But once you find someone with capacity, it is mutually beneficial for them. It's something that they love, and they believe, you know, they believe in your film. If they come to believe in your film and you establish trust with them, it will be a mutually beneficial, harmonious arrangement, which to me, it feels like friendship. Like all of the major donors, some of them donors I didn't know. These are not all my friends. Like some of them, most of them, a lot of the top donors are people I absolutely did not know until I
Well,
started.
then, Peter, that's a good segue into the question I have, which is,
Yeah.
how did you go about prospecting? Because you were doing a personal documentary. It's one thing if you were doing an issue-based documentary,
Yeah.
where it's a little bit, more clear cut, where you find possible donors or organizations that could be partners. But with a personal documentary, that could be, a much more challenging thing to do.
Yeah.
So how did you go about that, finding these donors?
So it's a graphic, I think I would say, like a small circle that grows bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So who do you start out with? You start out with the people that you know, love you and support you, and then everyone who knew and loved Jimmy, my brother. So we started with that, and some people who knew and loved Jimmy were like, great, good luck. Some were like, take me off your list, very few, but some of them were like, great, I'll give you $100. Some of them were like, great, I'll give you $1,000. And, you just you have to start somewhere. So you start with a core group, and you sort of see who is interested and who gravitates. And that's why I'm a big, big supporter of events. I really love events. Of course, my major experience with events was pre-pandemic, so it's a little bit different. But when we did these 5 shows and 5 fundraisers in 5 cities, I created what's called a host committee. And these were people that I knew, friends of mine, friends of my brother's. And I said, look, you only have 3 duties. Will you do this? You agree to have your name on the fundraiser. You agree to buy at least 1 ticket. And the tickets were not that expensive. They were like $40-$50. And you help promote it to your friends. And then if you have more energy, more time, we'll give you some other duties to do. But because of this, in each of the cities, we raised $6,000 from about 60 people. So on average, we got about $100 per person who came, and that increased it exponentially increased our stakeholders, people that were interested, because my friend Sonia brought her friend, my friend Michael brought his friend. So, if you start with this core and kind of build your way out, then sometimes you jump to people that are just completely in another universe, which is amazing. And our top donor, George Guerra in San Diego, who's been an angel and a saint for us, we met through a mutual friend who neither of us are really that close with. And, somehow he found out about the film. He didn't know me. He didn't know my brother. He was just captivated by it. And he's become our top donor.
Lucia, I want to get to you in a second about fundraising and budgeting. But I just want to make sure that we distinguish, Peter, between donors and investors. None of these people are investors, right? Only donors?
They've all given tax-deductible gifts through our fiscal sponsor, and our fiscal sponsor is Film Independent. We started out with Fractured Atlas. We moved away from them because they had some kind of strange restrictions about distribution. So we are now with Film Independent. I do have one investor. I do have an investor who's given about $17,000, so it's a relatively small amount. She is a longtime personal friend of mine, and we do have a written agreement. We also have spoken of the fact that it may be many, many years, that she may not get it back at all, or it may be many years. But I felt comfortable with that small amount of investment of somebody that I'm intending to pay back.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Lucia, you mentioned you wanted to talk about budgeting in the context of fundraising.
Yes, my Achilles heel is always budgeting, which I know is not a very fun topic to talk about sometimes. But Peter M is sort of the fundraising genius, and I'm the budgeting person. I don't have a background in fundraising. That is not my focus. But together, bringing those 2 skills together, I think, is how we've been able to make the progress that we have. So I just want to talk just briefly about our budgeting process, because I think it's helpful for filmmakers. So Peter said that it's fine if you use Excel. So we use an Excel to track. I did use an accounting program similar to QuickBooks for a year, and then I went back to the Excel. Honestly, if I had to do it again, I'm actually in the process of developing an Airtable, if anyone's familiar with that. It's a free database program. That's actually what we use to build our strategic plan. I am developing a template, an accounting template for filmmakers on Airtable. But so I'm like, yes, use Excel if you have to. But the most important thing is, no matter what you're using, make sure you're using something. Make sure you're tracking your expenses, that you're making sure that you're tracking that both for financial and accounting purposes, but also budgeting. So we made a budget in the beginning, and then depending on how much you're spending, we started by kind of doing a budgeting check-in every quarter. So we made a budget for the whole project, and then we broke it down. Again, it sounds similar to the strategic planning. Well, that's intentional. You do them together. You have to have your strategic plan before you make a budget. That is a big issue that sometimes people have, that they're like, they want to make a budget, but they don't know what their plan is. So we make the plan, and then we made this budget. We broke it down by years. In the beginning, it was probably 3 years. And then for the current year, the next year, we break that down into quarters. And then every quarter, for people that are not spending a lot, I feel like that's good timing. We would look and we'd say, how much did we spend last quarter? And what are we planning to spend in the next quarter? And that's when we would find out, oh, we overspent we did more shoots than we planned for. So, we didn't spend as much on travel as we expected because it was a pandemic. So we look at what we spent and make that adjustment. And then looking at what we wanted to do in the next quarter, and that would become basically Peter M's fundraising blueprint. So then he'd be able to say, okay, I need $5,000 for travel, $10,000 for the editor, $2,000 to pay, Peter S for producing. And he would use that information for his I was gonna say funders, for his donors, to really communicate to them, this is what we need. And also talking about that in terms of people, fundamentally, all of our biggest expenses is paying artists, is paying creators a decent wage. I don't know if wage is not the right word, but paying them well. We wanted to make sure that people were being paid for their time, because we respect art and we respect people and their time. And so really talking about that it's not just oh, we need money for this. This is our editor, Kelly. Isn't she great and amazing? We want to, keep having her, work on this project. So just that's sort of how the budgeting and the fundraising go hand in hand. And then, so we would always have, and that's, I like this, Peter, about our current accounting sheet, is we're always this is how much we've raised. Now we're on a monthly basis because our cash flow is really tight, and we're sort of spending more, so we have to keep a tighter rein on it. But there's a fundraising goal for every month. So it's maybe 1,000, it's maybe 2,000, maybe it's 500 for whatever it is, but he'd always have that goal. And Peter M always he'd be like, I'm going to raise 2,000. I'm like, okay. And then I don't know, he would raise it. I'm still blown away that he has been able to raise that. But it's really shown me how you do it. And making sure that you're setting those goals for yourself, even when they're ambitious. But then when you don't make those goals, that you're revisiting your plan.
I just want to remind folks that we're going to get to the questions really soon. I actually just have one more before we get to them. So please use the raised hand function. I know there were a ton of questions in the chat. So don't be bashful. I guess as for the three of you, in a sense, we talked a lot about things that went right during this, that you learned along the way and that worked for you. What did not work for you? What mistakes, did you make? What would you do differently from your experience in doing this first film?
I'll say something really quick. I guess, getting the film into festivals was a big unknown, and we wrestled within our own trio about how important Sundance was. And I said, I thought applying to Sundance was important because it was something I could tell our donors, we are raising this money to complete the film, to give it to Sundance. And we really knew we weren't going to get in, and we didn't get in, and that was fine. And donors didn't care. They didn't even ask. We didn't say we didn't get in, whatever, it was fine. But there was a big, long, scary time when we didn't get into any festivals. And we spent so much money applying to festivals. Eventually we got into our first festival, which thankfully was a wonderful one, the British Film Institute's Flair Festival in London, and things just sort of continued on wonderfully since then. We did work a little bit kind of unofficially with the Film Collaborative, who I highly recommend. If you don't know of the Film Collaborative, they're a wonderful organization. If they decide to take on your film, they will advocate for you to get into festivals. So big recommendation for the Film Collaborative. They did not ultimately select our film, but they're very kind and friendly to us. Love them very much. We ended up eventually settling with a film festival agent, coordinator, consultant named B. Ryan Glick with GQ, who is now submitting us to festivals. And so, we feel like we really lost a lot of money applying to festivals, but I'm not sure we could have done anything else. We recently appeared at a festival that was not a really, I'm not going to say the name, it just wasn't a very successful festival, and we wouldn't have known it really. But I mean, I think you want to do your due diligence about, like, I think every other festival on our list has been fine, but you just want to do your due diligence about, is the festival worth applying for? Is it going to be a good festival? Do they have the wherewithal to create a good...
Can you whisper the name in the chat?
No, thank you.
Lucia, same question. Peter Schulman, same question to you. I mean, was there, anything that you would do differently aside from not waste a lot of money applying to too many festivals?
There's two things that come to mind. I have to say I told you so, but there was a big emphasis on grant writing for a long time, which I was grumpy about. And because I just felt like we weren't going to get those grants, and they take a tremendous amount of time to apply for. If that's not to say that I'm against grant writing in all situations, but if you are pursuing grants, I would recommend to make sure that the grants that you're applying to, that you are a very good fit, so for example, there's just like a whole list of all the like film independent grants that like you're probably not going to get unless you know somebody in that world, like the Sundance Producers Grant. I've been in the Sundance Producers Grant like semi-finalist before, but of course we didn't get it for the project because no one gets it unless you know the people at Sundance. Just, you're not going to get it. So don't spend 30 hours, that's 30 hours that you could be calling people that you know or taking them out to coffee, asking them for $50, Again, even just like some of the events that Peter has talked about too. But I would say if you are going to go after grants, that really looking at local grants, grants that are like less competitive. Of the few grants that we did get, Peter got a grant from the Chicago Cultural Grant. I saw somebody else in here has that grant, and then got a California Humanities Grant, right? Those are both like local, and they were both not film grants. And I think that that's like the biggest thing, especially for documentary filmmakers, because as somebody that works primarily in the nonprofit world, we're always looking at, we're always applying to grants with our like nonprofit programming ideas. And so when filmmakers come, it's like the Kellogg Foundation. I'm consulting another project. Again, it's related to maternal mortality, but go to the Kellogg Foundation and be like, we're going to do this documentary about maternal mortality in the US. And they're like, oh, great spin on a topic that we're really passionate about that, people are not doing. So I definitely recommend looking outside of the traditional film grants, because there's the few film grants that are out there, just a long shot is putting it like generously. And then the other thing that we learned is like editing is going to take a very long time. It's going to take a really long time. I think in the beginning we really believed that it was going to take, I don't know, what we think, 3 months or something, and then
like
really
6 months.
And how long did it take in the end?
A year and a half.
Yeah.
We thought it was gonna be like 4 months, and then it was a year and a half.
And that's like actually really good, to be honest. I mean, that was part of that was made possible, I think, in some weird ways by the pandemic. Like it was literally in the pandemic. And then Peter just being able to like raise a lot of money furiously during that time, because it, editing is very expensive, but like there's just no, to me, that's almost like the most important money that you spend. There's just no replacement for good editors, and it is expensive. I mean, we paid definitely mid-range for 2 editors like at the top of their game, and I am like, that was worth every penny. There's nothing that I could say that was like worth more than having those editors. I mean, there's much in my mind, directors, both of them, and producers as anyone else in the project.